Hello, everyone. Now, hello, everyone. I really hope you can hear me this time. Yesterday, I tried this and nobody could hear me. So it was really frustrating. I clicked every single click and I could not figure out the sound issue. So I spent yesterday afternoon switching to a different streaming service so that the one I'm using now is much more user friendly. So I'm so excited you're with me today. My name is Jane Powell, and I have a little quilt biz on Dream It Quilted. You can see up here. And um, about 10 years ago, I spent the good part of a year in South America. And that was where I first saw arpilleras. I'll show you, I'll split the camera so you can see what I've got here. I'm going to be showing you some in just a little while. We're going to have a little chunk show. I don't know if anybody's going to show up today because this was kind of last minute. I meant to do this yesterday. And like I said, sound issues made it impossible. So I'm trying again today, and I thought I would keep a low profile just in case the sound didn't work again. But anyway, so you might be watching the recording, and that's great. So I spent about a decade ago, I spent about a year in South America, and I went to Ecuador, Peru, Argentina, and Chile. And I spent the bulk of my time in Chile. And that was where I really learned how arpilleras were started during the Pinochet dictatorship back in the 70s. And women used these as a way to protest. And so I'm a quilter, and I know there are many quilters who love the idea of quilts as storytelling. And also, especially in today's political environment, quilts being used as social protest. So I have three types of arpilleras to show you today, and I'm going to talk you through the different techniques. The Peruvian ones are very different from the Chilean ones, and so I'll talk about the differences there and how the early arpilleras, before the ones like we know of that are applique, the earliest ones were back in the 60s. Violeta Parra, who was a folk singer and artist known as the, what do they call her? The mother of folk art in South America. And she was the first Latin American to be featured in the Louvre in France back in 1966, I believe it was. And she was featured for 5 weeks. Her wire sculptures, her paintings, and her art pieces. And so that was the first known arpilleras, and they were kind of this embroidery style ones. Hers were much larger. They were like canvas size, large painting size arpilleras. But this is a small one, and I'll show you up close on the demo cam here in just a minute. But so I'll show you what these look like and talk you through those a little bit. And then this is another style. The word arpillera, the literal translation is burlap. But the kind of figurative translation is it's been called a cloth of resistance because they were used to protest and to bring awareness to the human rights violations that were happening in Chile during the Pinochet dictatorship. So they became known as cloths of resistance. Solidarity art, they're in that category. But this is one I got in Peru at a street market. And I got this one from it was an indigenous group. I'm just looking so I can make sure you can see it in the camera. From an indigenous group, lady who had a little booth at a street market. And this was kind of the traditional way of thinking of arpilleras where they had, they stitched it directly onto burlap. And I'm going to show you up close on the demo cam in just a few minutes. I just wanted to get the whole picture right now. So she told me this was the indigenous language here. It's not Spanish. And I asked her in Spanish. I speak Spanish decently well, not great, but I could do a little more than get by. And I asked her what these words meant, and she told me, and I've forgotten over time. I think one of them meant work hard, study hard, that kind of thing is what it says. So I should probably Google it. I don't remember what language it was though. Maybe she was descendants of the Incas. I'm not sure because this was in Peru, but it is an indigenous language in South America. So I'll show you that one up close in just a few minutes. And then this is a traditional Chilean one. And these are what I saw anyway in Chile, ones that look like this. Um, the ones that I saw in Chile when I was there, this was about 2014, they have, um, they're a little bit simpler looking. And when I say simple, I don't mean um, there wasn't great technique to it and talent to make them. I mean, the fabrics are calmer. You don't see print, and there's not as much going on. It's not quite busy um, as Peruvian ones that I'll show you in just a minute. Um, so I love these because they look a little bit calmer, and to me, they're a little bit easier to look at. So I'll be showing you these way up close in a minute. Um, and then this is an example of a Peruvian one. And there you go, right there. So you see what I mean by the Peruvian ones are quite a bit busier. To me, they look a lot busier, and the other ones I'm going to show you certainly are busier. Um, but a lot of times the Peruvian ones, you'll see llamas. And when I was in Peru, of course, I went to Machu Picchu, and the first thing I saw when I got off the bus and walked into the facility was a llama standing there eating some grass. And I had no idea that llamas were still at Machu Picchu, so little did I know they are everywhere there. Okay, so one difference I want to show you while I've got you on the big cam. Um, the demo cam is going to be really like extreme up close ones. Is the Peruvian ones that I saw all had these applique crochet borders. I don't know if they're crochet or knitted or both. Some of them might be crocheted, some of them might be knitted. And they are applique on, just stitched on very carefully there. And so those I saw on all of the Peruvian ones. Now, the Chilean ones that I saw in the markets, and let me tell you, when I was in Chile, I was all over Chile, not just in one place in Santiago. I traveled to a lot of different places around Chile, and I only saw arpilleras being sold in two places. One was in a little souvenir shop in Easter Island, of all places, which is like Hawaii to the US, right? It's 5 hours off the coast in this small souvenir shop on their one street because the Easter Island area is it's very small. You know, the one touristy street that has all the souvenirs shops and things are it was just a small little shop and they had a wall of arpilleras and they all were the same. They all had nothing on the edges. And they're just flipped right side out. So they're not like a traditional quilt in that there's no batting in it, there's no full-on stitching after the fact. Um, and so, and you see that's like a burlap fabric right there. So, um, but back in the 70s and 80s, when women were making these as protest um, banners or protest wall hangings, I guess you could say, you could call them. They were all about the size of a cafeteria tray, usually square, but not really huge, like the painting on the wall back there. That was not normal to have big, huge ones because they had to smuggle them out of the country to sell them around the world. The priests would literally smuggle them under their robes to hide them from the military support. And they would go to countries, mostly Chileans had been exiled because they knew that they had support there. And the exiled Chileans would buy them. Sometimes the general public would buy them. And that was how the women supported themselves in Chile after their loved ones disappeared. And I say that because let me show you, I want to show you one thing. Down across the bottom, you see in the comments, I have a link to my website. And on my website is this RPS page. And by the way, if you're here, thank you so much for joining. Sorry about the debacle yesterday when I tried to do this live yesterday. I got it figured out today. So go ahead in the chat and tell me where you're coming from. I still want to see that. And I'd love to know if you have any arpilleras or what your interest is in arpilleras. Have you been to South America, or is it just a craft that you find really compelling and you wanted to learn about? So this page on my website is a compilation of English things for us to see, because there's a lot of stuff about arpilleras on the web that is in Spanish, right? And so I wanted to really make it accessible to those of you who don't speak Spanish or don't speak it very well, like me, and give you some English resources so you can learn about it. So on that website, on that page on my website, you'll see links to suggested reading, like movies and video clips to watch of people who lived through the event, articles to read, things like that. So I really recommend that you go there. But also, I'm going to put this on for just a minute. On Tuesday morning, this coming Tuesday, I'm going to be going on Zoom live, and you can access it if you're able to click this in the banner here. You can access it on my website in the shop. If you'll click on the shop, you can access it, and it's a paid event. It's $20. It's a 90-minute lecture, and the reason I charge for that one, this is the one that I give to Quilt Guild, and I have done a lot of academic research on arpilleras. And so I really go into the history of arpilleras, what was going on politically, historically in Chile to make these come about and to make women use them as cloths of resistance. And what were some of the themes that they used and in their arpilleras, and kind of a whole story of how they came about and how they really informed the world about the human rights violations in Chile under the Pinochet dictatorship, back when social media, cell phones, YouTube streaming, all of this stuff did not exist, and how they got the word out. So it's quite a compelling presentation. I'd love to have you there. It's on Tuesday morning. And all right, so that is kind of an overview of the arpilleras that I'm going to show you. And so let me kind of show you what I've got going on here. I've got another camera here where I'm going to show you up close lots of arpilleras that I'm going to be showing you with extreme close-ups and talking you through it. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat as I'm going through, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. I'm going to turn my camera off, so you're not going to be able to see me because I'm going to be moving over because the webcam is to my right over here, and you won't be able to see me on this screen anyway. So let me go on over there and show you some. So this is a small arpillera. Okay, you can see it's about the size of my hand. It's probably 8 by 6. And, you know, you would see some of these smaller ones. I got this in Chile in 2014. And I just really like having this smaller one because when I present this in live audiences with quilt groups, quilt guilds, this is something I'm able to put into like a Ziploc bag and pass it around in the audience, and they can look at it up close on their own. And so this one, you can see how sweet it is. And I want to show you how small these little people are. They are so tiny. And they use like stitching, basically like what we use here and what we've learned, you know, with like blanket stitch, some this looks like some X's. I don't know what you would call this stitch, but lots of sort of a thicker, it looks like a bunch of X's along the mountains here. Another blanket stitch here, some French knots, and then really up close stitching here for the fence. You know, they just use some yarn. It's not really like a DMC thread. It's more like a thin yarn here. And then for the flowers, you see that it's just simple little stitches with a brightly colored thread. And most of what you would see are very brightly colored textiles and tapestries. Um, Hello there, Gratitude Quilter. I'm glad that you found me on the Global Quilt Connection. I'm definitely there. And so if you see the way that they do it, they fold it right side out. So it's different from a quilt the way we do the binding. What they do is they put this together like a landscape quilt. They start the sky and the earth, and then they fill in things like mountains. The sky, this is always the Andes Mountains. In most arpilleras, you will see a sunshine. That kind of hope back then. You always see the Andes Mountains to keep them grounded. And then they would layer other things on, like the trees, the houses, and then the very last thing would be the embellishments, the stitching, the people. Okay, so that's an example of one. They lay it all out, sew it together, and then they have this burlap backing, probably because burlap's really inexpensive. And they sew it around, leave a turn hole, and flip it right side out, and then press it. And so that's how they did this. And then, like I said, in some of the Peruvian ones that I have, they would do the crochet or knitted edges. So I want to show you quickly these as well. These are the ones that were thought to be the first types of arpilleras, meaning that they were actually stitched on burlap. Okay, so it's like a thin yarn, nothing fancy or no fancy or expensive yarns here. I love that. Just craft art at its finest. Now, how many of us stitch like this, where the back looks the exact same as the front? um, yeah, I can do it with cross stitch, but anyway, so just recognizing the talent there. I saw these in Isla Negra, which is about an hour west of Santiago on the coastline in Chile. And it's where Pablo Neruda, the famous poet from Chile, he has an estate there that you can go and visit. And it is amazing. If you go to his estate, or if you ever go to Chile, I really recommend seeing his home either in Santiago or Isla Negra or both. They are both amazing. So Pablo Neruda had a bunch of collections. He collected all kinds of things, pipes, glass bottles, arpilleras. And in his house were a bunch of arpilleras on the wall, much larger than this. But I bought this one in a gift shop. And so I love showing this in my presentations. And also, this is one that I bought in the gift shop. It was a kit that you could put together. And so I started sewing it. And then I thought, when I started giving this presentation, I thought that I would leave it unfinished so that you can kind of see the process. So you see here we have, they would stitch the outline of whatever it was first in black, and then they would go and fill it in. So that's the process I was using here. And so, yeah, my back isn't half bad, is it? Baby got back, right? So this is the one that I did. You can see it stitched directly on the burlap. They turn over the edges. You don't have those raw edges. So these are believed to have been the first types of arpilleras. And then when the dictatorship happened and women were looking for ways to get their message out to the world, they kind of used these as the idea, but then changed it over to fabric as opposed to just the stitching for theirs. So one more that I wanted to show you, I showed you this kind of the back one from, not back one, but from farther away a few minutes ago. So I wanted to show you up close. This is the one that I got at a street market in Peru. And this was from an indigenous group. And this was the indigenous language, probably Inca or Inca descendants. And it's all different types of textiles on here, along with stitching. And I loved it so much. So you can see this is kind of that traditional arpillera wording where that literal translation where they're stitching it directly onto burlap, and then they covered the edges here. It doesn't look like they're turned under so much as maybe that was the selvage piece. Yeah, because you can definitely see the raw edge here. And they just, it looks like it's machines. Yeah, it's definitely machine sewed on this banner, this kind of a braid is what I would call this, as the border all around. So let me show you this one. I just had to buy it from her. And she had a bunch of them there. Look at all the people, not unlike the three-dimensional people that you'll see and some others that I'm going to show you. So you guys are getting a good close-up look at my collection. I don't show this many in my presentation, of my collection because I go so much into the history of them, and which that's interesting too, because you get to see lots of the ones that the women in Chile made back in the day. But look, I love this one. It's like a woman, I'm guessing, has her little baby tucked in, and the little hats. Just all kinds of textiles thrown together and made into some wall art. I really love this. So this is an example of something that you might see, and um, it would be an arpillera as well because it's stitched onto the burlap. Okay. All right. Let's look at some other ones. I'm going to show you this Peruvian one up close. Now you see the Peruvian one, back out just a little bit. Okay, this Peruvian one, what you'll see are the Andes Mountains. Those are similar. So Chilean and Peruvian ones, you'll see the Andes Mountains, the sunshine, almost always. And these are condors. Those are the kind of the popular bird there. Very, you see those everywhere. And I'm not sure if it's like a national bird or what, I don't know. But then they have the clouds up here stitched on with a blanket stitch. You see up close again how they stitched on this crochet edge. And a lot of times in Peruvian ones, you'll see a smiley face of the sunshine. I never saw that in a Chilean one, but you see it often in the Peruvian ones. Okay, and so I'm just going to show around. You see, what I mean by the Peruvian ones being a little bit busier, it has seemed to me, where they have a lot of stitching, just a whole lot going on, which is so fun to look at. Truly a storytelling quilt. I mean, you could look at this one. She's got a little, I don't know what, no, it's not a baby. I think she's like sewing. But really is a storytelling quilt. You can look at this and really see what their life is like, what the story they're telling. They live on a farm. I'm guessing they've got these. Let me show you these for this. So this looks like sort of a knit fabric, like a t-shirt fabric, and they stuffed it. And then this is also like a t-shirt fabric, which this is great to use for the people and for these because it doesn't fray. So you'll see that fabric used a lot in these RPS, but really all kinds of fabric. There is no limit to the type of fabric that they will use. And the little leash for the llama, I just love that. And I want you to notice how they've done the feet. So they do the feet, and in my workshop, I do a workshop a couple of times a year, and I teach you how to make these people. But the feet are really fun because they haven't gone to too much trouble to make the feet, and I love that. They've kept it simple and easy. They have the feet down here, and all they did was stitch it, so maybe they look like sandals or something. And I'll show you some more where they definitely do look like sandals. But I just loved it that they were like, you know what, we're not going to go overboard with these feet. Let's just put a cross on it and call it some sandals. So I really love that. All right. I don't know what is going on here. I don't know what he's carrying. If that's a balloon, I'm not sure what's happening there. Maybe a fruit. Okay, so let me know in the chat if you have any questions as we go along. That's a Peruvian one. And then this is another Chilean one. And you can see pretty easily the difference here in techniques between the Chilean and the Peruvian ones. We don't have any edging on this one. You see the similarity though. We've got the mountains and the sunshine, and we have everything else added. Now, back in the days when women were making these as protest art, you would not see something like this, like a farm scene. You would see something like a protest shown in fabric, and I'll show those in my presentation. But this would have been called what we call propaganda art, and this was where the Pinochet's wife was known to host her own arpilleras groups, where they would make everything look rosy and happy in Chile. And so this was called their propaganda art. They would do things like farm scenes. They might do a nativity scene, something like that. So what I want you to notice here is just the simplicity in these shapes. So really, you just cut out this odd shape that looks like nothing until you put it on the fabric and add the stitching. and then it looks like a sheep. I just love that so much. These tiny little people, probably it looks like it's made out of knit fabric, and they maneuver the people around. So aren't they fun to look at? And just notice how they're using brightly colored fabrics that aren't the typical color for what they are. So they're using whatever they have on hand, and I love that about it. For me, I would be someone who stresses about there's no red or yellow roof. I've got to find a roof colored fabric, right? In the early days of making the arpilleras, when the women were making them as protest art, they were using whatever they had. Oftentimes, they were using clothing from the loved one in their life who had gone disappeared. They were using their clothing as kind of honoring them in their work. And they would use whatever colors they had for whatever. So, like, a tire on a vehicle might be purple. And it wasn't until later years when I want to show you the stitching on these swans. It wasn't until later years when the military started to figure out what they were doing, um, and they had to start smuggling these out of the country. But they started to get funding from the churches where they were making these in groups. And the churches were giving them fabrics that were more like what it was. So then you started to see black tires of car. So the church was helping to fund their efforts. They made a nonprofit to help out women. And you can see that was just turned right side out. No batting, no final quilting stitches. This is just the landscape with the backing and all of the embellishments that go with it. So smart on them for not adding that extra step that we have to add in quilting, right? Okay, so let me pull up a couple of Peruvian ones, and you'll see a difference right away. Yep, here we go. See, aren't they so much busier? It's just fun too. That's just a different style. Okay, so, and like I said, in a lot of the Peruvian ones that I saw, but none of the Chilean ones that I saw, oftentimes the sunshine will have a happy face, and I just love that. And oftentimes you'll see a rainbow. And as was the tradition, especially in the ones that were made back during the dictatorship when they were trying to tell the world what was going on, there was usually a word on there. And this word is paisaje, which means like countryside or landscape. But back in the day when Chilean women were making these for the protests, they would put words in there like allanamiento, which means night raid, to illustrate what they were showing or to label what they were showing. They would also sometimes put a date. That date would sometimes be the date of the person who had disappeared in their life. And they might also put the person's name, something like that, the person's name that they were honoring that went missing. So just look at this one and see the Andes Mountains. And what the Peruvian ones are very distinct because they do this stuffed applique. So they put like batting or polyfill underneath it, and then they stitch around it, and it really gives it's done here too. It really gives this nice to dimension and texture to their RBS. And I was talking to you about the feet and the sandals in the last one. So look at this one. They use that their stitching to show the sandals for the feet, and I just love that. I think that is so fun and unique. And then they made up stitching to look like the roof, okay, just like we would do in a landscape. So, and this one is this is still like a fabric, but sometimes you'll see felt and stitching that down. Look at these ducks. I love them so much. And notice again, it's just a weird shape that you cut out of your fabric until you add the stitching that makes it a duck or a swan or whatever you want it to be. And then I love how they did the water, showing the ripples in the water with their stitching. That's really neat as well. Okay, and then the llamas, you see that often in the Peruvian ones where they have the llamas. And I just love how they're using different textiles to show on the llama saddle. That's sort of a woven fabric and then just a simple yarn. And look at the feet on this guy. his feet, this is like boots, but it's out of like a pleather or vinyl, some sort of fabric like that. It looks like a pleather, that kind of material. But yeah, you see the crochet edge and it's just turned right side out and then they stitch this on. So lots of fun. This one is again like a countryside. And then this is the last one I have to show you. This would have also been some solidarity art. Let me show both cameras for a minute so that you can see this one big before I show you the close up. Let me actually. Okay, so this is the Noah's Ark one. And back during the dictatorship, this would have been called propaganda because look how, we're just reading Bible stories here in Chile, nothing to see here, right? So look at that. You don't see the mountains or the sunshine because, of course, this is a water scene. And then I'll show you these other two. I didn't show you the big ones up close. Well, I showed them up close, but I didn't show them overall. And then this other one I just showed you with the smiley face in the sunshine. So much fun. So busy. I love this kind of thing and stitching and fabric art where there's just so much going on. Okay, so let me go back to my up close camera so you can see this up close. And just noticing the fabrics that they use, the prints that they use for the different kinds of animals. And then making these, I don't know that I can make these. Look how tiny that is. These tiny little balls, stitch balls, they're really like hard. So they stuffed them really well. It's like a knit fabric in the palm trees here. Even this little bird is stuffed. Can you see that? It's like raised. So really love the dimension and the time and dedication to making something so, I guess, technical. Is that the word? All right, so let me come back up closer. There's Noah. Look at his feet. I love the elephant ears. And then the different kinds of fish in there, ebony and ivory, right? And the seals coming into the water. I guess these are sea lions and seals we have here. They've got the little whiskers on those, and then these little swans and ducks in the water, and the polar bears. I love it so much. This is so much fun. So that one, I really love that one. It's getting out of focus, but let me come back to both cameras. So that is an overview of what these arpilleras are and were. And they're really fun to see. You'll see them in street markets in South America. I saw them in Peru and Ecuador. Oddly enough, I really didn't see them in Chile. Although they are still made there. There are younger generations who are using these as current social justice quilts. And if you follow hashtag arpilleras on Instagram, you will see some more current arpilleras being made. And that's really fun to see. But using some of these techniques to create your own storytelling quilt or even a social justice quilt is something you feel strongly about. Just thinking about these techniques is really interesting. I love how these women just use the talent that they had to make what they have and using the fabrics and materials that they had to make these. So these are a lot of fun. If you have any questions, let me know. I am going to put across the bottom here, this is the lecture that I'm doing on Zoom Live on Tuesday, and I'll put a link to it in the chat so that you can click right on it if you would like to. There we go. You can click right on it and read more about it. And that is a live Zoom presentation. It's going to be about 90 minutes. I'm going to go into what I was doing in Chile, how I ended up there. I'll show some of these again and kind of show what an arpillera is. But then I'm going to go into why they started to use them as protests. Why were they so desperate to tell their message to the world? And some of the examples, very compelling themes that came out during that time period, and lots of pictures. Now, I don't have any arpilleras from that time, from that era in the 70s and 80s, because they are in collections, private collections, and museums all over the world. So I wouldn't be able to get my hands on one. If I could, I would be like, I would guard it with my life. So question here, the Peruvian ones were not protests. No, I've never heard of the Peruvian women using them as protest back in the 70s and 80s. Now they do make them, and the Chilean women, they're very proprietary of this craft and the art that went behind it. And they're very much like, we were the first ones to make them. We made them first, and the Peruvians copied us. So you'll see them in Ecuador, Peru. I've seen them in Argentina. I've seen pictures of them in Colombia as well. But my nephew um, went to Colombia to study abroad there a couple of years ago, and I told him, I said, if you see an RPA, like go to a flea market, whatever. If you see one, buy one for me, and I'll pay you back whatever it costs. And he went to a flea market and showed them a picture of it, and it was, this is an arpillera, and they looked at him like he was nuts. They had no idea what he was talking about. But I have seen on the World Wide Web, I have seen pictures of Colombian arpilleras. So I know they might call them something different there, but he did have a picture to show them. But anyways, they are made in different groups around South America, but sometimes they can be hard to find. Like I said, when I was in Chile, I saw them in one street market. I was riding my bike through the city one day, just kind of having a Sunday afternoon, chilling out, and I just happened upon this neighborhood street fair. And there was one lady there who had a few at her booth, and I didn't have any money on me, or I would have bought one. Um, but really, you don't see them all over Chile, which is odd to me. But after the dictatorship, the women no longer, well, they had to go back to work, after the dictatorship ended and move on with their lives. And they didn't have the time or the purpose that they once had to be making these as protest art anymore, because he was no longer in office. So it's a really compelling story. If you'd like to join me on Tuesday, I'd love to see you there. I also give this presentation to guilds, so I'm happy to speak to you if you or your guild want to reach out to me. If there are any other questions, go ahead and put them in there. I'm so glad that you joined me today. I know I've got an itty bitty audience. That's because this was not planned. I meant to do it yesterday, so I appreciate you realizing that I am on and joining me. And remember to go and visit my website, because I have that page dedicated to arpilleras in English, with lots of different links to reading and stuff like that. Let me show you. I actually have a couple here. If you look up on Amazon or thrifted bookstores online, there's some online bookstores. You can find some really good books that have a lot of pictures in them. This is called Stitching Truth. It's by Marjorie Agostine, who is still alive, a women's rights activist. And she wrote a really great book here. This one's very easy to read. It's not very dense, it's not very academic, but it's a great, great read. And she even has some pictures of ones from that time period. So this is a great book to check out, Stitching Truth. It should be linked on my website. This is another one that I've seen, Tapestries of Hope, Threads of Love, also by Marjorie Agostine. She's someone to look up. And if you see here, The Forward by Isabel Allende. If you never heard of Isabel Allende, she's a Chilean American author. She's like the Danielle Steele of, her genre, which is like a lot of historical fiction, very epic sagas, family sagas are her books, and they're really good. And in at least one of her books, Violetta, she wrote about the Arpilleras women in one chapter of it. The book was based on a woman and her whole family through the generations. It's really good. But Isabel Allende was the cousin of Salvador Allende, who was overthrown in the coup. And she had to exile. She first exiled to Venezuela, I believe, and then ended up in the US. And so she's been in the US for many, many, many years. And so the fact that she herself is an exile and such a notable exile that she was related to the president who was overthrown in the coup. But there are lots of pictures of the people who made them in here, stories of the people who made them, and a lot of pictures of the arpilleras themselves. I really recommend you trying to get your hands on some of the books that are made. I don't know how many of them are in print still, but when I was in Santiago, I went to the Human Rights Museum. I didn't know anything about Chilean history, and I had no idea what I was walking into. And that was when I first learned of the these being made as solidarity art and protest art. And they had a wall, a huge gymnasium-sized wall of arpilleras collection. It was really, really amazing. And this was a book that they had. It is, what do you call them? It's a catalog of everything that they have in their collection. And I emailed the director of collections when I was living in Santiago and asked him, I said, I didn't see this in your gift shop. Can I buy one? And he gave it to me. I mean, I would have paid. This book is priceless to me. Like I have it in a fireproof container in my home because it means that much to me. But it's all of the collections that they have in their museum, and just really, really great on pianists. I don't know if you can get your hands on this anymore, but it is a fantastic book. I do not take this with me when I present because I don't want it to disappear. I love it so much. I don't want to lose it or somebody to love it so much that they want to take it home with them. So, all right, this has been great. Are there any other questions or comments before I end the live stream? Thank you for those of you who showed up, and I hope those of you who watch the recording enjoy it. And I'm going to sign off. Thanks so much for being here. Bye-bye.